Wait a second, was Loki defeated and chained up by Shanks? And will Loki actually go on to defeat an entire Yonko crew for Luffy in the future? I'm asking because we just learned a ton of new exciting things about the best new One Piece character since Doflamingo for me, including his bounty, his true power levels, or at least a hint at it, and also so many parallels to Shanks that it will literally blow your minds. Because with all of the crazy details I found, it seems more and more likely to me that Loki might actually kill Shanks in the future, not Blackbeard. Which is an absolutely wild statement. I mean, I know that, trust me. I could hardly believe how all of this actually ended up fitting together myself. But let's start here at the beginning, because in chapter 1131 of One Piece, Luffy continues his fascinating interaction with the so-called cursed Prince of Elbaf. And honestly, I kind of felt like the more we get to know about Loki here, the more he stands out as a striking parallel to Luffy's mentor. Check this out. Loki has been introduced as a bad guy type of character, right? I mean, his first mention in the last chapter stated that he was the cursed prince and devoted himself to darkness. Whatever that means, I guess. And in fact, he was even supposed to be executed for murdering his own father. I don't know why they didn't do that, but yeah, seems like he's pretty much a bad guy, right? Well, that's how Oda is presenting him. However, there is actually plenty of evidence, I think, that he might actually still be a good dude, or at least a morally gray dude, that I definitely want to talk about in just a few moments as well. So I'm personally still not 100% convinced that he is just straight up going to be evil. But just keep in mind here that he's possibly a good guy being introduced as a bad guy. Just take that for now. Which brings us back to Shanks, because he has basically the exact opposite character introduction. Because, you know, when we first meet him, he is this knight in shining armor type of character who saves Luffy, and kind of all throughout the story, he's presented as a friend and a hero. But then lately, we've kind of been getting more and more hints here that Shanks may actually not be the good guy that we all think that he is, or at least he may not be completely just on Luffy's side, but have his own interests. For example, there is still this completely unexplained panel of a character who looks like Shanks at least meeting the Gorosei. Then we have him and his crew just straight up obliterating Eustace Kid and Luffy's biggest fanboy Bartolomeo, plus Shanks really seems intent on going for the One Piece himself now. And so taking all of these puzzle pieces and putting them together now gives us a character that was introduced as purely good, but who might actually be more evil or selfish than we all thought. Again, the exact opposite of Loki, at least so far, which I did find a pretty interesting parallel between these two characters, but that's actually far from the only connection, of course, because they also have complex agendas that are hidden from us at this point as well. I mean, I just mentioned that Shanks is going for the One Piece, but is he really? I mean, is his plan just to support Luffy, or is he like a genuine rival who would even take out Luffy to reach his own goals? And similarly for Loki here, he clearly stated that he wants to bring an end to the entire world, but does that mean destroying the entire world like Kaido wanted, or simply bringing down some sort of corruption that he sees in the world and remaking the world anew? Actually, now that I think about it, I guess that's also what Kaido wanted, but yeah, you get the point. On top of having their hidden agendas though, these both have also ties to the Sun God, with Loki coming out and just straight up calling himself the Sun God, while Shanks was the one who found the Sun God fruit. And I want you to remember this and stick with me here until later, because there's actually a lot more crazy lore here I think I may have uncovered about Shanks' connection to this fruit, and this fruit potentially being connected to Elbaf. First though, that's already a bunch of connections to make my point, but before we explain why this is so important to the future of the story, we cannot forget the Norse mythology connection between these two as well. Because if you've seen my last few chapter reviews, or one of these really old character analysis of Shanks that I did, you will know that I think that Shanks is inspired by the Norse god Tyr for many reasons I won't all get into detail about right here, but what's mostly important is that Tyr chained up the mythical wolf Fenrir in Norse mythology, and as revenge, Fenrir actually bit off Tyr's hand, or I guess technically Tyr sacrificed his arm so the other gods could chain him up and basically distract him. Which of course I know isn't exactly what happened with Shanks' arm here, but with the new information we learned in this chapter, it seems more and more possible that Shanks was actually the person who helped capture Loki in the first place. I'm pretty sure you probably at least suspected that connection as well, right? Because I mean, just look at these two super important details right here. First, there's the fact that Loki and his subordinates are confirmed to have interacted with Shanks in the past, and that Loki also has been tied up now for around 6 years. Now, if you're as much of a One Piece fanatic as I am, where it technically has become my job at this point, point, you might remember that 6 years ago in the story was actually a really important moment in Shanks' life as well, because as we were told in chapter 957, Shanks only officially became a Yonko 6 years ago. Yeah. So on one hand, Shanks became an emperor 6 years ago, and then on the other hand, Loki was captured 6 years ago. Put that together with the fact that Shanks is friendly with the Giants and that Loki is wanted by the government, and to me it almost seems confirmed by this that Shanks was the one who helped the Giants capture and subdue Loki. Because let's be honest here, the Giants are really powerful compared to regular fighters, but they aren't really even close to something like Yonko tier. But from everything that has been presented to us about Loki, it really seems to me as if Oda really wants us to believe with this chapter that Loki is Yonko level, or at least really, really close to it. I hope you agree, right? That's the vibe we've been getting. So considering what we know from the story, these regular giants here shouldn't stand any chance against a real Yonko tier character, so I'd bet a lot of money now. I would even bet my cat Gojo, actually, okay, maybe not that, but like, I'd bet this hat here that Shanks was the one who helped the Giants capture Loki, and then in some way, this is what earned Shanks his Emperor status as a result. Plus, of course, Shanks' apparent connection with the Gorosei could have also been the reason why Loki has a so-called special bounty of 2.6 billion berries from 6 years ago, which is just an absurdly high amount for someone who may not ever have even left Elbaf to begin with. Also, speaking of special things, you can get access to a ton of special perks, artwork, and exciting bonus content like early chapter reviews by supporting the channel over on Patreon using the link in the description below. But at this point, you might be asking yourself, what does this all really mean for the future of the story and Loki's character? Well, of course it means that we're gonna simply have to see Shanks versus Loki round number 2, right? Okay, who here doesn't want to see that? Please put your hands up. I want to know who you crazy people are. Because beyond being just extremely cool, it would also have some major narrative consequences, especially if Luffy does what we all think he's gonna do here in the next few chapters, if you know what I mean. But more on that crime in just a few moments. First, I just want you to picture this in your mind for a minute here. It's a pretty classic trope in anime and manga for the mentor type character to die, and Shanks certainly has been fitting that role for a long time for Luffy, at least early in his life, so I think it's pretty safe to say that most people expect Shanks to die at some point. He has had that really big death flag on him basically since the beginning. And of course, for the longest time, everyone pretty much assumed it was 100% guaranteed that if Shanks dies, Blackbeard would be the one to kill him, but now Loki here is coming on pretty strong to me as a candidate for that role as well. Ooh, what happened? Getting really itchy. I actually bought this specifically for the chapter reviews. I'm not sure if I'm gonna be always wearing it, but hey. Anyways, let's look at the evidence here. Shanks and Loki have some obvious history together. Loki seems like he has a real grudge against Shanks, at least to a certain degree. He also just straight up said that he would kill any pirate that Luffy wants, and he is obviously very powerful. But on top of all of these points here, just think about it from Luffy's perspective. I mean, we all just assume that Loki will get free from his chains at some point, and we'll talk about the details about that next, but let's assume that Luffy will actually be the one to do it. So if Luffy does free Loki and then Loki goes on to kill Shanks, like that would absolutely crush Luffy. I mean, I'm talking Marineford Luffy blacking out type of reaction, because not only would Shanks die, but it would literally be Luffy's fault for setting Loki free. So a real double heartbreaker there, which could push Luffy to even more desperate levels than we've ever seen him before, which I'm personally just all here for, because we honestly haven't had a major setback like that in the entire story for a very, very long time, and really Ace's death might have been the only time this ever really happened for Luffy. But before any of this could even become possible, Loki does need to get out of these chains, which were confirmed today are actually made out of sea stone. Makes sense for locking up a devil fruit user, and also kind of confirms that he actually has a devil fruit. But what's actually most interesting about Loki's chains is that Oda has now presented Luffy with a little bit of a challenge, a bit of a side quest here. You see, I think we all assumed that Luffy could just break the chains or something to set the Curse Prince free, but it turns out that there is an actual key up in the village above that is needed to set Loki free from those chains. gods. And to me, since this is now kind of being presented as a quest specifically for Luffy, I just really like to think that he will be the one to actually do that. I mean, otherwise, why set it up in this specific way? Luffy's already separated from his crew, so there's just no one left right now to talk him out of this dumb idea. Plus, we have already seen in this arc that Luffy cannot resist the call to adventure. However, I also just can't ignore that there is one massive problem with this whole situation as well. I mean, consider this. We all know that Luffy usually has a really good sense for people's true intentions. I mean, we've seen plenty, countless even, of occasions where people have seemed bad at first and Luffy still showed trust in them before they eventually became allies. I'm thinking like when Rebecca attacked him in Dressrosa, or when he made an alliance with Law and Punk Hazard, or I mean, even, hey, go back and talk about Robin, right? In all of these cases, the obvious choice would be to not side with these seemingly bad or at least dangerous characters, but in the end, Luffy was always proven right to trust them. And maybe I'm just super delusional about this because of how much I like Loki, and call me out on that, that's completely fine, but so far I'm kind of getting these same vibes from Loki, because so far the only real hint that Luffy has shown of not liking Loki was when he was actually talking bad about Shanks. Otherwise, there's no obvious tension between these two, and Luffy is just super curious to talk to this dude. Plus, we also have to consider some things that do seem to show that Loki's a good character. I mean, one example we've already discussed before is like Loki's potential marriage to Lola, showing that he has a bit of a soft side, but this chapter dropped some new hints as well. First, and most surprisingly, Loki is friends with animals. Now, this may seem like it doesn't mean much, but let's be real, in One Piece, being friends with animals is usually a pretty good sign that you're a decent person. Just think of Luffy's own animal friends during the time skip in Ruskaina, or Tama's animal friends in Wano. So that's yet another point on the Loki as a good guy chart for me. But on top of that though, we might even have a little bit of foreshadowing that Loki will eventually sail the seas as Luffy's ally, when he promised Luffy that he would just straight up fight any pirate crew for him if he freed him. Which, I mean, of course, I will admit isn't a super solid hint at this point, but the fact that Oda introduced this very specific idea at this point all seems very important to me. But even ignoring this specific line right here, altogether to me just shows that Luffy seems to trust this guy and might set him free, even though that doesn't seem like the wisest choice to the readers right now. Very curious what you guys think about that. But then of course we also have moments like this where he talks about killing Luffy that do point to him not being such a great guy after all. Plus there was the conflict with Shanks and the whole murdering his father thing, so at this point there is evidence to me for him being both good or evil, which, let's be honest here, is probably right about where Oda wants us with our understanding of Loki so far anyways. However, let me tell you, no matter if he's good or bad, I still just want Luffy to free Loki, just for the fact that it would be so interesting to see what happens next, especially as that would probably make the Straw Hat Captain somewhat of an enemy to some of the giants of Elbaf. Plus, of course, we have to remember, if Luffy doesn't free Loki here, who will? I mean, I guess there's always Road, who could do something like sneak in and steal the key while the giants and Straw Hats are feasting or something. In fact, that could lead to Road asking Loki to wipe out the Straw Hats as a reward, since he already doesn't like Luffy and the crew, so I suppose that option would make some sense at all, but I wouldn't be like a massive fan of it. But before we move on from Loki, because I still want to talk about some other really important things that happen in this chapter, there is still one really massive question that I'm honestly still trying to wrap my head around here. Because can someone please tell me what in the world is going on with all of these multiple sun gods? It's really confusing at this point. And at first, you know, I was kind of thinking, well, maybe Luffy's fruit isn't really the sun god fruit like we all thought. I mean, Loki clearly thinks that he is the sun god, not like Road imitating that. And the sun god title does seem very closely tied with the ruling family of Elbaf, or the royal family's legendary devil fruit. And so I was kind of starting to think that maybe we were wrong about Luffy's devil fruit again, even after the reveal in Wano, but then actually went back and looked at all the places that the actual name Sun God has been mentioned in the story, and from that to me it seems pretty clear that Luffy does in fact have the real Sun God fruit. I mean, he's been called that by multiple different sources, including Who's Who, and even the Gorosei themselves called his this fruit, the sun god fruit right here. So Luffy's fruit seems to be legit, which leaves us with a few options for why Loki thinks that he is the true sun god. And first off, he could just straight up be out of his mind here, but since Road was also pretending to be the sun god, the truth is probably that the sun god is probably a title that is passed down or maybe even prophesized about in Elbaf. If it has been passed down, then it's probably related to the devil fruit that Loki killed his father to eat as well. But that again raises even more questions, like, is the fruit that Loki ate a second sun god fruit with similar powers? I mean, we have seen fruits with similar powers before, and even a copy of a devil fruit with Momonosuke's fruit as well, so we can't really rule out that option either. But then again, when I think about it, in my mind, if it's related to the devil fruit, then there is a much more interesting option here as well, because let me paint you a little picture. Imagine this, that the giants have protected this mythical legendary fruit for centuries from the rest of the world. Then King Harald starts to notice that, hey, you know what? My son Loki is kind of stupidly powerful and power hungry, and it's probably best if, he doesn't have this very legendary devil fruit. But as we already learned, Harald couldn't actually stop Loki in a fight, so what if instead he sent the true legendary devil fruit off of the island and replaced it with another kind of decoy devil fruit himself? Which might sound a little bit crazy, but we actually never really learned how Cypherpole here got Luffy's devil fruit in the first place, so maybe King Harald let them sneak in and take it, or maybe he just straight up gave it to them. Plus, just consider that if Shanks has been friends with the giants for a long time, King Harald could have even told Shanks to go hunt down that fruit once it left the country, which again, I agree would be a little bit out there, I do know that, but it would help explain at the same time how Luffy has the true sun god fruit while Loki thinks he is the sun god, but has actually eaten a replacement fruit instead, which apparently still seems to be very powerful. Which then of course makes for a really interesting and fun scenario if Luffy shows off the Nika powers in front of Loki. I mean, what would the giant prince do in that situation? Would he recognize the Nika powers as the true sun god? Because I'm gonna say I'm not so sure, but that's not, again, the only option for why Loki considered himself the sun god either. Perhaps the sun god is just a title that is given to the ruler or the strongest giant of the island of Elbaf, and Loki simply thinks that is what he is. The strongest guy, that means he is the sun god. Definitely another interesting option here, but there are still some other mysteries around this whole situation either. For example, just take this scene right here, where the giant captains Dory and Bragi tell Luffy that his Nika form resembles tales about a god in Elbaf. But just really think about this for a moment. If they knew Luffy was Nika and the Nika fruit is their legendary devil fruit treasure, wouldn't it make sense that they would at least question how Luffy got their home's legendary fruit? Or wouldn't they even become mad since this is only supposed to be eaten by a member of the giant royal family? But they didn't say anything, so that kind of makes me wonder if the sun god Nika fruit is even related to Elbaf at all. And really, the more I started thinking about this, I was just like, wow, this is a much more complex question here about the relationship between Luffy's devil fruit and Elbaf plus Loki's sun god statement than I thought about, than I expected it to be, I guess, at the beginning when I, looked into it. Because I was like, oh yeah, must be the Elbaf fruit, but then there's a lot of little contradictions here. I'm not sure, let me know what you think about this. Whatever it is, I really can't wait to find out the answer, but that's obviously not the only big question that Loki made me think of in this chapter either, because when the giant prince told Luffy that he would take out any pirate crew that Luffy requested, it actually made me stop and think about how Luffy would potentially answer that question. You probably did too. Would Luffy just do the Luffy thing and blow Loki off and say he didn't want him to fight his battles for him? I mean, probably, but then again, what if he didn't? Who would Luffy possibly want to have taken out? Well, I mean, the only real enemies that Luffy has are the world government and Blackbeard. So I guess that would be the one that he would suggest here, though honestly, I'm sure that he wants to get back at Blackbeard himself after he caused the whole Marineford situation by capturing Ace, right? Now, I think you might have missed this, but there was actually yet another reveal in this chapter that answers a question that we've had for exactly 700 chapters. 700. On the dot, that is. And that can't be a coincidence, right? Because after this chapter, we finally know the truth of Treasure Tree Adam. Turns out that the enormous tree that makes up all of Elbaf is straight up the Adam tree itself, which I mean, we've all been kind of speculating, but it also makes a ton of sense why Loki would be tied to it, because really, how else do you tie up a powerhouse like Loki except by tying him to a basically indestructible tree? Which, you know, pretty cool that we finally know more about this legendary tree and got some real confirmation here, though. Just how long are those chains, though, if they really wrap all the way around the tree? A question for another day, but that's not all that we learned about Elbaf, though, because apparently this snowy region is considered the underworld, where prisoners are held and also executed. Which to me specifically was really interesting, because it seems that it is the first place where people would land on the island, right? So you just start out at the underworld level here, not a very friendly welcome, I guess, but it also makes me wonder, what was Elbaf like before the world flooded? Are there like more levels to the tree beneath the water, like the roots or other parts of the 9 realms like we've discussed in this video before? I would honestly love to see that, but then of course we also learned that Luffy's giant friend Hydrogen is preparing a feast for Luffy and the crew as well, which, you know, is pretty heartwarming as well, because we actually see him here hunting this enormous moose, which they then need to take back up to the village in the branches above, which actually confirms that the village we see there should be friendly to the Straw Hats. Unless, of course, Luffy sneaks in there, steals the key, and causes trouble. And I gotta say, while it was really great to see Hydrogen finally, who, I guess, is he the king of Elbaf or not? I'm curious to find that out too, but the most heartwarming scene from this chapter just has to be Robin getting her haircut in preparation for meeting Saul. Okay, first off, I think it's so cute that she just wants to go back to her pre-time skip haircut, so like he recognizes her. And also, I love, and I just can't stretch this enough, I love pre-time skip Robin's design, so I am all for it. Thank you. But that brings us to another brand new mystery, because what in the world is happening to Saul? Because at the end of this chapter, we learned that he has apparently collapsed and is not responding, right? And come on, Oda, please don't do this to my cute girl Robin here with those bangs. I mean, she looks so happy here. You can't just break her heart again by killing off her friend right away after telling her that he, like, you know, Robin just found out that he's alive again. Look, don't do this. But honestly, I'm actually trying to figure out, what is the entire point of this? I mean, obviously Saul has the knowledge from Ohara, and we can assume that he knows about the poneglyphs on Elbaf, and I do think that we were all expecting Saul and Robin to kind of work together to solve some of the Void Century's mysteries, but maybe instead Oda wants Robin to have to figure it out all on her own, which then I guess it would make sense why he would want to get rid of Saul. But then again, why introduce him in the first place? How cruel would that be? So yeah, I would absolutely hate it if anything happened to Saul. But with all that being said, my brain just keeps coming back to this guy, Loki, right here, because, like, what is his role going to be in this arc? And I'm actually going to shock you here with my next thought, because, hear me out, we still can't rule out that Loki is a real candidate to join the Straw Hat crew. Okay, big take, I know. And I know you might be thinking that there is no way he even fits on the Sunny, right? But what if his devil fruit would allow him, say, to shapeshift or change his size if it's a mythical, you know, devil fruit? He could just become smaller, theoretically. So, do you see what I'm thinking here? How cool would it be to have a literal giant on the Straw Hat crew, especially considering his power levels and his top tier personality, and also, you know, Elbaf is so close to the Void Century and Joy Boy, it would make sense for the giant, you know, for a giant to join Luffy. But I will admit it does sound like a little bit of a stretch, so if you want to find out why I picked him as a potential crew member, and also what other people make even more sense to join Luffy's crew in the future, then you can watch that video below me right here. Otherwise, Shanks, so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.